Let's speak with Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP. Afternoon to you, Ben.
Good afternoon, Ian.
Do you know what? It reminded me of, I mean, there's still a little bit of this goes on, and you know this far better than I do. You know, the minute you raise immigration, somebody goes, oh, you're a racist, are you? It's like, what? Because I want to talk about immigration, a country's responsibility to have a good immigration policy. And it's sort of in that ballpark, isn't it, that the minute that you say, oh, let's leave the ECHR, oh, there's only one other country that's ever done that, and we know who that is, we get that. And then now this character, the Attorney General, has played Godwin's Law and gone straight to the Nazi card.
Yeah, I mean, you're absolutely right to equate it to immigration because it's what I would call the internationalists, the globalists who wish to run the United Kingdom pursuant to what they call international law and effectively make the United Kingdom available to the world at large.
Yeah.
So they go hand in hand, the immigration and this obsession with membership of supranational institutions and tying ourselves into treaties which prohibit us from being able to do that which is needed for the national interest. And they view, by the way, anyone who believes in national interest also as right-wing or racist, xenophobic, and all the rest of it. But what's particularly curious, I think, about Lord Hermer's comments, in view of the fact particularly that he is the Attorney General and he should know better, is that the European Convention of Human Rights was just that until 1995. It was just a convention. From 1949 to 1995, it had no basis in domestic law. It was a convention set up for the guidance of its members, not for the implementation of its conventions as domestic law. That changed in 1995 when the rules of the European convention was rewritten, and it required that member states make the European Court of Human Rights the supreme judicial body within their own countries. And in 1998, Tony Blair did that. So for the vast majority of the existence of the ECHR, actually it hasn't been international law. Yeah. And Lord Hermer should know that. And the other thing he should know is that international law runs directly opposite to the principle that no parliament can bind a successor parliament. Correct. In the United Kingdom. It is at the heart of our democracy that a parliament should be free to do that which it wishes. And through international law and the increasing implementation of international law domestically, we've progressively set aside domestic democracy. And we have become a much less democratic country than we were because of international law, because Parliament has its hands tied by these international laws and memberships of supranational institutions. So it's quite different. And there's no similarity between 1933 Germany and the move for totalitarian Nazism and those of us who wish to leave the ECHR. In fact, I would argue that we would, in 1933, those of us who wanted to leave the ECHR, we would have stood in opposition to the Nazis, because those of us who want to leave the ECHR believe in democracy. We believe in British interests being put first, laws being made in the United Kingdom by our domestic parliament, for our domestic people, by politicians who can be booted out by our own citizenry.
Absolutely.
It's the antithesis of the position taken by Hermer, and he should know much better than that.
I often think, Ben, when we discuss sort of these areas, if you put something into a dissertation at university and you had a really good, intelligent lecturer and you were constructing the ECHR either from scratch or you were certainly trying to do an objective overview on it, you would throw in stuff like Winston Churchill wrote it, which is a very sort of seductive line, which frankly I think is almost the only thing that's kept it going all this time because everybody reaches for that example. But you'd be absolutely marked down if you were trying to insist that this was not just intrinsic to a good system, but absolutely crucial. You'd be marked down and the lecturer would say to you, well, what about Canada? What about Australia? What about, you know, all the countries, the USA, that are not part of this? How the heck have they managed to survive without being in this? I mean, so you'd be marked out of probably kicked out of university for crimes of idiocy if you wrote that, because it's absolutely a crucial counter to this obsession with the ECHR, which, as you rightly said, Ben, clearly served a purpose. It was absolutely right. We knew what it was there for. Now it's punching above its weight. It's exceeding its powers. It really has no. It really has no place. Out of control. Yeah.
It's out of control. And the other thing to say about the ECHR and the way its convention has been embedded in domestic law and our Human Rights Act is that it has dumbed down the understanding of what it means to be a British citizen. In codifying human rights in these 1718 broad conventions of the ECHR, what we've done is set aside what it means to be a British citizen, because we've equated, as Lord Hermer no doubt would wish to do, the rights of immigrants as equal to those as the rights of British citizens. We've removed what it meant to be a British citizen. So now you'll often find people challenging, well, what does it mean to be British? How is that different? And in part, they're confused about what it means to be British because we have set aside what it means to be British through the codifying of human rights. And we had a perfectly clear understanding, as you rightly point out, Ian, as do the States, Canada, Australia, New Zealand, and so on, of what human rights are. We established them, as it happens, well before we codified it into our domestic law. And I would argue that the codification of the ECHR and the imposition of its court in our domestic application in the United Kingdom, I think has been deeply damaging to the culture as well as the constitution of this country. And it seeks at its heart to remove borders, remove nation statehoods, create a morass of Europeanism without distinct nationalities. And I stand absolutely against that. I completely agree that nation states should cooperate as independent nation states on the international stage, but they should remain independent. They shouldn't be drawn into this kind of enmeshed hybrid form of sovereignty slash sorry, I'm searching for words, but within this kind of web of Europeanization, setting aside what it means to be British, German, French, Italian. And that's what's happened.
And I sense, Ben, that actually there's a lot more behind this. And those that agitate and campaign and talk about this kind of gold standard of everything, this overarching ECHR system, they do so because in their hearts, they are very much, and you mentioned about the rights of, somebody who shouldn't be in this country, apparently has exactly the same rights as somebody who is resident and born and bred, whether it's here, France, wherever it happens to be. I mean, that is a political thought, isn't it? When somebody has that, they're the same people that probably don't want any borders. They're the same people that kind of sing from that sort of hymn sheet.
Absolutely right. They're internationalists, they're globalists. They don't believe in the United Kingdom. And that, by the way, is the schism in Western politics at the moment. The schism is between those of us who believe in nation states and the importance of nation states, and those of us who believe in globalism and rule of international institutions. And that latter group, which includes Lord Hermer, Starmer, and others, are essentially anti the nation state. And that's why I've said repeatedly, and it applies to Lord Hermer as much as it does to Starmer, that Starmer is anti-British. We've seen that in the way that he's dealt with Chagos, in the way that he's taking us even closer to the European Union, setting aside our ability to set our own laws in agriculture, making us subject to the European Court of Justice when it comes to agricultural regulations and laws, and so on and so forth. These people don't believe in the country. And so when you hear Starmer talking about British interests, he's actually lying. He doesn't believe in that agenda, nor does Hermer. Hermer, by the way, is a particularly awful individual. He's someone who represented Gerry Adams, an enemy, in my view, of the United Kingdom, a terrorist, in my view. He was advising Caribbean islands on how to make claims against the United Kingdom for reparations. He represented many illegal migrants who shouldn't be in this country. And and so on and so forth. And by the way, with Gerry Adams, he even tried to change the Legacy Act that was brought in by the Conservatives a couple of years ago, which prohibited people like Gerry Adams making a claim against the British government for compensation for having been imprisoned. He was trying to change that law so Gerry Adams could bring a case against the United Kingdom. Can you imagine that this man is our Attorney General? And he has completely politicized. He's completely politicized his office.
100%. And the apology that he's currently given now, Ben, final comment from you, which is that they were clumsy remarks and he kind of shouldn't have said it. Is that good enough?
No, it's not good enough. They're much worse than clumsy remarks. They reveal an attorney general who knows very little about the law, who stands against democracy. And it comes in a long line of comments and actions by this man that are basically, as I say, anti-British. Lord Hermer should be made to resign. He should go. He's a really awful human being.
There it is. Strong stuff, Ben. As ever, thank you, Ben Habib, former Brexit Party MEP, of course. Always got a very, very robust and you know, some would say brutal, others would just say honest opinion on the issues of the day. The Attorney General should resign, says Ben.